Your front door wasn't really yours. Not in 1970s Britain. It belonged to half the street. It belonged to the milkman before you'd even woken. It belonged to the man from the Prue on a Friday tea time, the rag and bone man whose horse you could hear 3 roads away, and the Avon Lady with her brochure under her arm. You didn't have a video doorbell. You didn't freeze and pretend you were out. You answered, because a knock on the door meant the world had come to find you. Some of them brought milk and lemonade. Some brought brushes and lipstick and a bit of company. And some brought the quiet business of keeping a working-class family afloat. The credit, the coal, the penny policy that paid for a funeral nobody wanted to talk about. They came every week, rain or shine, and then, one by one, they stopped coming. This is who used to knock on your door, and this is what we lost when the knocking stopped. The ones who brought something good. The milkman. He was the first knock of the day, except it usually wasn't a knock at all. It was the sound of the float, that low electric hum gliding up the road before 6, the chink and rattle of glass bottles in their crates, the gate, the 3 steps, the doorstep. You never saw him do it, you just woke to find the milk already there, beaded with cold, the foil tops sometimes pecked through by the blue tits who'd learned exactly where the cream sat at the top of the bottle. Gold top if you were doing well that week, silver top for most. And the cream, that inch of yellow cream under the lid, was a thing children fought over. He knew your street better than you did. He knew which houses had a new baby and needed an extra pint. Which old dear up the road hadn't taken her milk in 2 days and might want checking on. He knew the dog that went for him and the gate that stuck. You left him a note rolled into the neck of an empty bottle. No milk Thursday, away till Monday. And he read it and remembered, because that was the job. You paid him on a Friday, coins counted into his hand at the door, and you had a quick word about the weather while you did it. And it wasn't only milk on that float. There was orange juice in the little bottles, eggs on a good week, and at Christmas a bottle of something for the table. All of it left by the door without a word. Some of you will remember the snow especially, the milk freezing solid on the step before anyone got to it, the cream pushing up out of the neck and lifting the foil cap clean off like a little gold hat. You'd bring it in half frozen and stand it by the fire to thaw. He worked Christmas morning. He worked through the cold that kept everyone else indoors. And when the year turned, a card would come through the door. A happy Christmas from your milkman. And you'd leave a little extra in an empty bottle for him, because over the years he'd become as familiar as anyone in the family. There were thousands of them on every road in the country before any of us were properly awake. He was the closest thing a street had to a heartbeat, and the sound of those bottles at dawn is one most of you haven't heard in 30 years. The Corona Pop Lorry. The milk came to your door. The pop you half had to chase. The Corona lorry would turn into the street and the children would be out before it stopped, because everyone knew what those wooden crates meant. Corona was Welsh, made by Thomas and Evans, who'd started bottling fizzy drinks in Porth in the Rhondda Valley back in the 1890s, and grown it into a name known in every corner of Britain. Dandelion and burdock, the dark one that tasted like nothing else. American cream soda, cherryade that stained your tongue, limeade, orangeade, the lot, all rattling on the back of a lorry that pulled up outside your house. And here's the part that turned every household into a small army of bottle hunters. The empties were worth money. You paid a deposit on the glass and you got it back when you returned the bottle. So a child sent out to find the empties wasn't doing a chore, he was doing a treasure hunt, scouring under the sink, behind the shed, down the side of the settee, because 3 returned bottles meant enough for a fresh one and maybe a penny over for sweets. Mothers knew exactly how many were owed. Nobody let a Corona bottle leave the house for nothing. The delivery man knew his regulars, knew which flavour each house took, left the new crate and took the empties away in the same movement. He'd hand a bottle straight to a child if a mother nodded. He worked a long round, street after street, and the pop he carried wasn't a treat that came in a weekly shop. It came to your door, and that made it special in a way a supermarket bottle never could be. It was a weekly thing, a fixed thing, a knock you waited for. And if you grew up on a street that got the Corona lorry, you can still hear those bottles clinking in the crate and still taste the dandelion and burdock going flat in the glass. The ice cream van. Then there was the knock that wasn't a knock, and wasn't even a man at your door. It was a tune coming up the road, and it pulled every child out of every house at once. Greensleeves, played slightly out of tune, slightly too slow, drifting between the houses on a warm evening. Mr. Whippy, Mr. Softy, Tony Bell. The names changed depending where you grew up, but the chime did the same thing everywhere. It stopped children dead in the middle of whatever they were doing and sent them sprinting indoors for money. There was the great playground belief, passed solemnly between children as fact, that if the music was playing, it meant the van had run out of ice cream. A rumour put about, some said, by parents who'd had enough of handing over coins. Nobody really believed it, and everybody ran anyway. You wanted the 99, the soft whip with the chocolate flake stood up in it like a flag. You wanted the raspberry sauce poured over the top, red running down the side and over your fingers before you'd got back to the gate. It was often the first thing a child bought with money of their own. Your own coins, your own decision, your own small transaction at the hatch of a van. The man leaning out, the cold air rolling off the freezer, the queue of children gone quiet with concentration as each one made the great decision. 99, or screwball, or a lolly, or the rocket ice with the 3 stripes. There was always one child counting out coppers, a penny short, and the agony of it written all over his face. And there was an etiquette to it. The van stopped where it always stopped. You didn't dawdle, because he wouldn't wait forever, and the tune cutting off mid-note as he pulled away was the cruelest sound in childhood. That chime was the sound of summer, of long light evenings, of being let out till dark and called back in by your mother's voice from a doorstep 3 gardens down. Hear it now, even faintly from across a park, and you're 7 years old again, and already running before you've decided to. The ones who kept the street turning. The Avon Lady. Not every caller sold something off the back of a lorry. Some of them were your neighbours. The Avon Lady was usually a woman from a few streets over, and her knock was the start of an event. Ding dong, Avon calling. Everyone in Britain knew the line from the adverts, and everyone knew the brochure that came with her. That glossy little catalogue full of lipsticks and scents and creams you circled and dog-eared and passed back the following week. The samples were the thing. Tiny white tubes of lipstick no bigger than your thumb, little sachets of perfume, miniature pots of cream. A child got to keep the empties and play shop with them. A mother got 10 minutes that were hers. Because the Avon Lady wasn't really only selling cosmetics. She was the women's network of the street, made flesh. She came in, she sat down, there was a cup of tea, and there was talk. Who was getting married? Who was struggling? Whose husband was on short time at the works? Whose daughter was courting, and whether the family approved? For a woman tied to the house all day, With the men out at work and the children at school, the knock at the door was company that came to her, on her terms, in her own front room. She might be the only adult conversation a young mother had all week. The order was almost the smaller part of it. It was one of the few callers a woman ran herself, chose herself, looked forward to herself. Money she controlled, spent on something that was hers. And that mattered more than the lipstick ever did. The Betterware Man. Close behind her came the man with the brushes. Betterware, Cleanies, two firms that had been sending men door to door since the 1920s, with a catalogue full of things you didn't know you needed until they were on your step. Brushes for every job in the house, dusters, mops, polish, gadgets for the kitchen, clever little tools that promised to make the whole business of keeping a home that bit easier. His trick was the soft sell. He'd leave the catalogue with you one week and call back the next to take the order. So the choosing happened in your own time, at your own table, with no man stood over you. And often he'd leave the goods themselves before you'd handed over a penny, trusting you to pay on his next round. That was how a lot of these callers worked. Trust on tick, a handshake economy on the doorstep built on the fact that he'd be back next week, and you weren't going anywhere either. And on a settled street, everybody's word was worth something. He demonstrated too. A new brush whisked across the doormat to show how it picked up. A polish rubbed into the hall table so you could see the shine. Small theatre performed on 1,000 doorsteps a day. He kept the house stocked with the unglamorous things that kept it running, and he did it one street, one knock, one cup of tea at a time. The Rag and Bone Man. And then, from the older world, came the cart. You heard him before you saw him, the clop of a horse on the road, the rattle of the cart, and that long, half-swallowed cry going up between the houses. Any old iron. A call so worn down by years of shouting that you couldn't quite make out the words, only the tune of them. The Rag and Bone Man. The Totter. He came to take away what you didn't want. Scrap metal, old iron, worn-out clothes, a broken bedstead, anything with a bit of value left in it that he could sell on. Britain knew the figure inside out, because Britain watched him on the telly every week. Steptoe and Son, with Wilfrid Bramble as the grubby old man and Harry H. Corbett as the son who never quite escaped, ran on the BBC from 1962 to 1965 and came back in colour from 1970 to 1974. At its height, the show pulled in audiences north of 20 million. So the Rag and Bone Man wasn't a stranger. He was a national character, half comedy, half something sadder underneath. For the children, there was a payoff. Bring out the rags and you might get something back. A balloon on a stick, a goldfish swimming in a knotted bag of water, a few coppers. In some parts he handed over a donkey stone, the block you used to scrub and whiten your front step, because a clean doorstep was a point of pride, and the Totter was the man who supplied the means. He was already a figure from a fading age even then. The horse, the cart, the cry. Within a generation, he'd be all but gone. The Onion Johnny. Here's one that sounds invented and isn't. A man would knock on your door in a striped jumper and a beret, with a bicycle propped at your gate so loaded with onions you wondered how he rode it. Strings of pink onions hung from the handlebars, the crossbar, draped over his shoulders. He was French, properly French, from Brittany, from Roscoff and the villages around it, and he had crossed the channel by boat to sell onions in Britain, door to door, on a bike. They were called Onion Johnnies, and they were real, and they had been coming since 1828, when a Breton farmer worked out it was quicker to sail his onions across the water than cart them to Paris. By the late 1920s, around 1,400 of them were spread across Britain in a single season, their bikes seen as far north as Scotland. They'd live here from summer into winter, store their onions in rented barns, and ride out every day with the strings hung off the frame. The big pink Roscoff onion plaited into a tress, the largest one at the end. To a lot of British people, he was the first foreigner they ever spoke to, and for years he was the entire image of a Frenchman in the British mind. The beret, the stripes, the onions, the bicycle. He'd have a few words of English, enough to sell, enough for a joke at the door, and the housewives knew his onions were better than anything in the shops, and kept some back for him every season. He'd hang a string on your door handle, and you'd cook from it for months. The trade was already fading by the time you reached the 1970s, the old way dying out, the bikes giving way to vans, and the supermarkets taking the trade. But while it lasted, a man from another country pedalled up your road, leaned his impossible bicycle against your gate, and knocked on your door with a string of onions over his shoulder. The world really did come to find you. And then it didn't anymore. The ones who carried the weight. The Coalman. Now the knocks get heavier, and the first of them came covered head to foot in black. The coalman backed his lorry up to the curb, swung a 100-weight sack onto his back, that's around 50 kilos of coal across one man's shoulders, and carried it down the side of the house to the coal bunker, or the coal hole, again and again, until the order was in. His face was black with dust. His hands, his neck, the leather flap slung over his back to stop the sacks tearing his skin. He counted the sacks out loud so you could check, tipped them, folded the empties, and took your money at the door with fingers you could write your name on. This was the man who kept you from freezing. There's no romance to be had about that. Coal was how a working-class home stayed warm, how the water got hot, how the one fire in the front room kept a whole family alive through a British winter. The kids dressed in front of that fire, the clothes dried on a rack above it, the whole life of the house gathered round it, and every lump of it came down your path on a man's back. It was brutal work, and it showed on the men who did it. Bent backs, ruined lungs, hands that never came fully clean. He'd have a mug of tea at some houses and not others, and he remembered which. He knew how many sacks you took, and whether you were rationing it out to make it last to payday. So when the coal supply was threatened, it threatened everything. And in 1974 it was. The coal came out of pits run by the National Coal Board, dug by miners, and when the miners went on strike, the country ran short of the fuel that made its electricity. The government brought in the 3-day week, from the 1st of January to the 7th of March 1974, rationing power so that businesses got electricity only 3 days a week. Television shut down at 10:30. Families sat round candles and round that one coal fire in the dark, waiting it out. It put the coalman's weekly knock into sudden, sharp focus. The black-faced man hauling sacks down your path wasn't bringing a luxury. He was bringing the thing the whole house was built around. And when the coal stopped, the lights went out. The tallyman. Some knocks you waited for. This one you sometimes dreaded and were grateful for all the same. The tallyman. The clubman. On a lot of streets he was the Provvy, because the firm behind him was Provident, founded all the way back in 1880 in Bradford by a Methodist named Joshua Waddilove, who'd seen how hard it was for poor families to lay their hands on cash, and built a business to lend it to them in small, manageable amounts. Here's how working-class Britain actually bought things. Not on a card, on tick. You took a Provident cheque or joined a clothing club, and that voucher let you walk into the shops and come out with school shoes, a winter coat, the children's Christmas, things you could never have found the full money for in one go. And then, every week, the tallyman knocked, and you paid him back a little at a time, the amount written into a book, ticked off line by line, week after week. There was shame braided into it, no question. The neighbours saw him come. Everyone knew what the knock meant, and there were houses that kept the door on the latch and the curtains still when they couldn't pay that week, and a child sent to say Mam was out. He knew. He'd come back. He'd seen it all before, and the good ones were never hard about it, because a tallyman who pushed too far lost the round, and the round was a relationship measured in years. But there was dignity in it too, and the dignity mattered more. A family that always paid on time, never missed, never ducked the door, that was a family with a good name, and a good name was something the poorest house could still own outright. Mothers managed those repayments to the last penny, juggling the rent and the gas and the club money in their heads, robbing one to feed the other, and never letting it show, keeping the whole thing afloat so the children never knew how tight it had really been. The tallyman's knock was the sound of a family quietly refusing to go under. The man from the Provvy. And then there's the one that's hardest to talk about, the knock that was never really about what it seemed to be about. A man would come every week, smartly dressed, with a book, and collect a few pennies at the door. He worked for the Prudential, though Refuge and others did the same, and his policies cost coppers a week, which is why people called them penny policies. Across the whole country he was known by one phrase, the man from the Provvy. What was he collecting those pennies for? On the surface, life insurance, but everyone at that door knew what it was really for. It was for the funeral. It was so that when the worst came, a family would not have to face the shame of a pauper's burial. So a wife could bury her husband properly. So parents, and this is the part that catches in the throat, could bury a child with dignity if it came to it, in an age when that was a real and present fear in working homes. So picture it, a few pennies handed over at the door every single week for years, quietly, without fuss. Money the family could barely spare, set aside against the one day nobody would speak about out loud. The man wrote it in his book and tipped his hat and moved on to the next house, and the next, doing it for the whole street, carrying everybody's unspoken arrangement with death from door to door. He often knew the family for a lifetime. He'd taken the pennies when the children were born, and he'd be the one who came, book in hand, quiet and respectful, when the policy was finally claimed and there was a coffin to pay for. He'd sat in the front rooms of that street through every kind of weather and every kind of year. He saw the worry behind the door that the neighbours never saw, and week after week he was handed the cost of a family's last shred of pride, and he kept it safe. It was, in the end, a knockabout love, the most working-class kind of love there is, the kind that says, "When I go, I will not be a burden. You will not have to beg to lay me to rest. I have paid my pennies. I have seen to it. Get on with your lives." The doctor. Not every heavy knock came to take money or coal. One came to help, and it came right into the house. In the years after the National Health Service was founded, on the 5th of July 1948, the family doctor still came to you. You didn't always go to a surgery and sit in a waiting room. When a child was burning up with fever in the night, or the old man's chest had got bad again, somebody ran for the doctor, and the doctor came, in his coat, with his black bag. And the house changed when he arrived. The good chair was offered. The children were hushed and sent out of the way. There was that particular quiet as he went up the stairs, the murmur of his voice through the floorboards, the click of the bag opening. Everyone downstairs waiting on what he'd say when he came back down. He knew the family. He'd seen the grandparents, delivered the children, and he'd carry on seeing them for years. He wasn't a name on an app or a voice on a phone line. He was a man who knew your name and climbed your stairs and sat on the edge of the bed. That knock was care that travelled to you, kindness that came to the door, the reassurance of a trusted face arriving in the worst hours of the night. He'd write the prescription at your own kitchen table, take a sandwich if it was offered, ask after the grandmother by name. He charged you nothing at the door because the health service saw to that, and that was a quiet miracle to a generation who remembered when it hadn't been so. It belonged to the same world as all the others, a world where the important things in life turned up on your doorstep and knocked, because that was simply how a community looked after its own. So here's what they all had in common, every last one of them. The Milkman and the Corona Lorry, the Avon Lady and the Betterware Man, the Totter, the Onion Johnny, the Coalman, the Tallyman, the man from the Provvy, the doctor on the stairs. They meant your door was rarely locked, because the street looked after itself, and a knock meant you were known. Nobody on that road was invisible. Somebody noticed if your milk wasn't taken in. Somebody knew you were short this week. Somebody came every week to keep your home warm, fed, clothed, insured, and well. Now think about your door today. The bell rings and you glance at a little screen on your phone. You see a stranger in a high-vis jacket leaving a parcel on the step, and more often than not, you wait quietly for them to go, pretending you're out in your own home. The milk comes from a supermarket, the lemonade from a fridge, the credit from a card, the care from a number you ring and a queue you wait in. It all still comes. It just doesn't knock anymore, and it doesn't know your name. We didn't only lose the milkman, we lost the reason to answer the door. Every one of them is gone now, and the door stays shut. Which knock do you still remember? The rattle of the milk bottles before dawn? The Corona lorry turning into the street? The man from the Provvy on a Friday tea time? Tell us in the comments which one you felt the most. And if any of this brought back your mum sat talking to the Avon Lady, or your dad counting out the coal money at the door, send it to someone who'd remember it with you. Subscribe to the channel so these stories don't disappear the way the knocking did.